The evolution of equality in America. America did not begin with equality. 1607, the first indentured servants are brought to America immediately within the first decade of the Virginia Company's settling of Jamestown. Before the American Revolution, 40 to 75% of white immigrants to America lived in indentured servitude at some point in their lives. Sell yourself into work for 4 to 7 years, and in return you get passage covered, room and board, maybe even a little land with your freedom's return. But that didn't last long. Many were forced into it. The able-bodied poor, beggars, vagrants, prostitutes, orphans, illegitimate children, children whose parents could not afford to raise them. The estimate is there's about a 20% female, 80% male ratio. Women tended to be domestic servants. Men usually worked the land, but there were the rare skilled tradesmen who were sold into it as a punishment for breaking a law. You had some protections, but it was a harsh situation. You could not change employers. You might not be able to choose where you lived. You could be sold to another owner with no say in the matter. You could be beaten. They were not often fed much, and you could not marry without your owner's consent. Sexual exploitation of females is thought to be common. It was illegal for an indentured servant to run away. The punishment was years added to your term. Pregnant females got 3 years added to their servitude per pregnancy by law to compensate their owners for labor lost. 1619, the first Africans arrived to Virginia as indentured servants. Because there were no slave laws, initially they were treated the same as any other indentured servants, but this did not last. 1640, a group of runaway servants are penalized with just years added to their servitude. John Punch is the only African among them. The judge extends his servitude for life. He's the first African servant to have any chance of freedom absolutely stripped from him. Historians believe this makes him the first American slave. Barack Obama recently discovered that he can trace his lineage back to him. 1/3 of all colonial indentured servants died while in servitude. Freed indentured servants usually had no education, little or no savings, and often skills nobody wished to pay fair money for. Many of them began to form a permanent impoverished underclass. What if you could buy someone once and own them forever? You could treat them however you like. You could force them to make more people whom you'd also own. What if they looked visibly different from you, so escape was less of a possibility for them? 1641, Massachusetts passes slave laws. 1661, Virginia passes slave laws. The colonies have shifted into a formal system of enslaving Africans. Using humans as slaves made affluent colonists so much wealthier. There are still indentured servants, but the market has spoken. By 1700, there are 30,000 enslaved humans in British North America. By 1770, there are 450,000 slaves. There is resistance. Some of it, Pennsylvania Quakers adopt an anti-slavery resolution in 1688. 1712, slaves revolt in New York City. 9 white men die. A backlash of laws imposing restrictions on slaves follows. There will be hundreds of documented slave uprisings in North America. Crispus Attucks is the first colonist to die in the Boston Massacre. He is a multiracial man, some say to be an escaped slave. He's also, officially, the first person killed in the American Revolution. July 4th, 1776, comes the very inspirational words of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal and that these truths are self-evident. 1775, George Washington orders his army recruiters to set free black men who would like to join the colonial army. 5,000 joined and fought against the British. 1778, Rhode Island legislature briefly passes a law offering freedom to black slaves who enlist. 90 slaves join. They fight in the Battle of Rhode Island. Soon after the battle, new legislature is voted in, and one of the first acts is to repeal the law. It is a very close call, but America wins the Revolutionary War. We gain our independence from England. The Articles of Confederation, the first American form of self-rule, is too weak. It begins to fail. We encode the plan for a more robust central government and adapt this Constitution, our current one, in 1788, becoming a federal republic. The word slave or slavery is not mentioned in the Constitution, but it's encoded in there nevertheless with compromises such as the 3/5 rule, giving slave states disproportionate representation, despite the fact that they have a few people who are allowed to vote. Vermont abolishes slavery in 1777. Pennsylvania abolishes slavery in 1780. Many northern states follow suit. In 1840, John Quincy Adams, 6th President of the United States, son of the 2nd President of the United States, refers to the language compromises and ethical compromises of the U.S. Constitution regarding slavery as the fig leaf covering essentially the private parts. The 1840 U.S. Census counts the number of slaves in America to be 2.5 million. The total population of 1840 America is only up to 17 million, so this number includes all of those slaves. America has only been a country now for about 50 years. One of these Americans is Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass ran away from slavery in 1838. A self-literate man, Douglass turned out to be both a brilliant orator and a powerful writer. His moving narrative of what life is like as an American slave opened the eyes of many to slavery's horrors and opened the minds of even more who'd wrongly assumed black people were not as capable of brilliance as any other race. His resulting international fame shamed America as a nation not living up to its own ideals. Both the abolitionist and women's movements were fighting to expand just who it was the Constitution defined as we the people when it used those inspiring words regarding justice and rights. Douglass believed the fundamental liberal philosophical values of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution were powerful enough to be expanded to properly include all people in America as having full rights of personhood. He called those liberal principles saving principles. Elizabeth Cady Stanton made a powerful revision to the Declaration of Independence by simply updating its language to include women. It was 1848, Seneca Falls, New York, at the first Convention for Women's Rights, and she adds the words that all men and women are created equal. Douglass was there to report on the Seneca Falls Convention and to lend his voice to women's cause. 1857, the tension between the American North, where slavery was illegal, and the American South, where slavery is entrenched, came to a head after the Supreme Court ruled that Dred Scott, a slave brought to the slavery-free state of Illinois, would remain a slave despite the laws passed in any state of America. This ruling solidified the legal notion of Black Americans as property instead of as people with rights. The Dred Scott ruling forced the institution of slavery into states that had outlawed it, leaving it no longer a matter left up to each state's own conscience or convenience. The Civil War comes 1861 to 1865, and over 3 million fight in it. Over 750,000 of them die. Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation by executive order in 1862, effective January 1st, 1863, that more than 3.5 million slaves in America are now free. Of course, to experience this freedom before the Civil War is over, slaves must make it to the Union Territory. John Wilkes Booth assassinates Abraham Lincoln in 1865 before the last battles are even fought. Lincoln is the first U.S. president to be assassinated. The very last land battle of the Civil War was fought in South Texas. Lee had already surrendered, but they have not received word yet. 13th Amendment, slavery is ended. 14th Amendment, if you're born in the U.S., you're an American citizen with equal protection and full rights to due process under the law. Any male 20 years old may vote. 15th Amendment, the right to vote may not be taken away from an American citizen based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Interestingly, Mississippi does not ratify the 13th Amendment until 1995, and even then the state failed to make it official by notifying the U.S. Archivist until 2013. Suddenly, millions of people who had been denied education, who had no possessions, no land, and no money were free. You can imagine the blend of hope and chaos that ensued. The American South, where most of these people lived, was war-ravaged. There was a desperate race to educate and employ, or to simply figure out what to do in the war aftermath. Some of the effort was altruistic, but there was also a terrible mixture of opportunism and revenge at play. For just about 10 years, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments worked as intended. Then individual states started passing laws trying to chip away at those protections. In 1890, Louisiana passes a law ordering the train lines to racially segregate their passenger car. A biracial man named Homer Plessy defies the law and rode in a whites-only car. His plan was to get arrested and have the law ruled unconstitutional in court. Surely it was in violation of the 14th Amendment. And a tragic blow to Plessy's goal, the Supreme Court rules in favor of allowing segregation. They claim that as long as facilities were separate but equal, Black Americans are receiving equal protection under the law. Plessy versus Ferguson is regarded as having opened up the floodgates to Jim Crow laws. Plessy versus Ferguson is never explicitly overruled. It takes over 50 years for a blow to even be struck against it, but then the de facto hits keep coming. We've got 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, the first ruling to reversal to legal segregation. Public schools can no longer be racially segregated. 1967, Loving versus Virginia, states can no longer ban interracial marriage. 2015, Obergefell versus Hodges, states can no longer ban gay marriage. Despite a long and bitter fight, women do not have the legally protected right to vote until the 19th Amendment is ratified in 1920. This is a full 133 years after the U.S. Constitution was originally ratified. This is 50 years after the 15th Amendment. There's still no amendment in the Bill of Rights establishing that women have all rights fully equal to men. There's no amendment to the Bill of Rights extending civil rights protection explicitly to LGBTQ American citizens. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal." An assassin shot Dr. King in 1968. This was just 4 years after the major Civil Rights Act of 1964 passes under Lyndon B. Johnson, outlawing racially segregated segregation and discrimination. This is just 1 year after the Loving v. Virginia ruling that stops interracial marriage bans. It came out in the aftermath of Dr. King's death that he'd been heavily targeted by FBI surveillance for years. All that attention, but no protection in the end.